Hey, I'm Josh Hawkins, and this is episode 8 of Opening Up the Gospels. In episode 7, I gave an introduction to the Gospel of Matthew, and I just want to continue today with a brief introduction to Mark. I love this version of the record of Jesus' life. It's action-packed, it's fast-paced, it's very clear, and it's very succinct. And most importantly, for our purpose in constructing a timeline of Jesus' life, Mark is arranged chronologically. Now, one of the benefits of Mark being arranged this way is that if you forget where specific events are in Jesus' life, you can always go back to Mark for a reference point, at least for most of the events in Galilee and in Passion Week. Now, if you never heard of Passion Week before, it's just a name for the last week of Jesus' life leading up to his death on the cross. All 4 of the Gospels narrate Passion Week with so much detail, and I can't wait to talk about it with you in so many future episodes. Now, as I said last time, these details about the Gospels matter to us because Jesus matters to us. Real people in history read these accounts of Jesus' life and words, and what the authors wrote helped them to put their faith in Jesus. These books are not just for scholars and theologians to dig into and pop out a neat little theology package for some church doctrinal statement or something. They're the life story of our Maker, and they should cause us to marvel over and over and over again. We can't forget the privilege that we have in each of these books. At every turn, we have to remember that it's Yahweh, the God of Genesis 1, the Lord of glory himself that we're beholding and seeking to know as we read the Gospels. Well, let's take a look at Mark. First, who wrote Mark? Well, just like Matthew, this Gospel is anonymous. No record of the author is preserved in the text itself. But there are several good reasons to believe that John Mark, the traveling companion to Paul, actually wrote this Gospel with the help of the Apostle Peter. Several of the early church fathers, including Irenaeus and Tertullian, Clement of Alexandria, Origen, and Jerome, they all affirm that John Mark was the author of this Gospel and was dependent upon the eyewitness accounts of Peter. Papias, a bishop in the Church of Asia Minor until about 130 AD, he claims that the Apostle John told him that Mark became the interpreter of Peter. Though what we have in the Gospel of Mark itself doesn't actually depend on it actually being written by John Mark, scholars agree that there doesn't really seem to be any reason to reject that tradition at all. So, John Mark of Jerusalem seems to be this Gospel's author. Where and when was Mark written? Well, early church tradition from Clement and Irenaeus say that Mark wrote his gospel from Rome to a Roman Christian audience. That fits pretty well with some of the things we see Mark referencing in his gospel, like when we see him translating some Aramaic expressions for his Greek-speaking audience. He also explains Jewish customs for his Gentile readers, like in Mark 7 and Mark 15. All of this agrees with other New Testament references which place Mark in Rome with both Paul and Peter. But again, we can't have solid certainty about this. We can only say that it seems most likely. What we can be a bit more certain about, though, is the dating of Mark's gospel in reference to the other gospels. In the past couple hundred years, evidence has shown that Mark's gospel was the first one to be written. As far as the date that Mark is written, well, there's a bunch of evidence that says perhaps in the mid-50s to the early 60s AD, and other evidence that points possibly to the late 60s or near 70 AD. Irenaeus says that Mark wrote it just following Peter's martyrdom, but Clement says that it was written while Peter was still preaching. So once again, we can't be 100% sure, but most scholars say that it probably was within that mid-50s to the mid-60s AD time frame. What about the structure of Mark? Unlike Matthew, which I said in the last episode was arranged topically, Mark is arranged chronologically. Mark spends the first half of his gospel up through chapter 8 narrating Jesus' public ministry in Galilee, and the second half narrating Jesus' last week in crucifixion in Jerusalem. Because it's chronological, its structure is very clear. Mark does skip a large portion of the second half of Jesus' ministry, though, the portion that Jesus spends in Perea. Luke is actually the one who narrates the events there, and we're going to talk about that in next week's episode. Mark also has a very fast-moving literary style. As you're reading, you're going to see the word immediately so often. Mark is very, very fond of that word. It appears 42 times in his gospel, compared to only 5 times in Matthew and only once in Luke. It really gives the effect of advancing the narrative in Mark. Now for some of the themes and the distinguishing features we see in Mark's gospel. Because Mark spends nearly half his gospel talking about Jesus' suffering, it's clear that perhaps his main purpose is to demonstrate the necessity of the Messiah's suffering before he reigns from Jerusalem. Mark focuses more on the miracles and the deeds of Jesus than on his teachings. Many long discourses recorded in the other Gospels are omitted from Mark's account. We do see Jesus, though, performing many miracles, from healing and deliverance, and even several times when he shows his divine power over his creation. Mark also presents the most human and down-to-earth portrait of Jesus compared to the other Gospels. We see a wide variety of his emotions, from compassion in Mark 1:41 to indignation in Mark 10:14 and grief in Mark 5:3 to amazement in Mark 6:6. Jesus is a real man who had real emotions just like us. I mean, it's so easy to read the Gospels with our fairy tale glasses on and forget that Jesus was a human who really felt these things. He wasn't a stoic, straight-faced, pale white guy with a halo floating above his head. I would encourage you, just spend some time meditating on his emotions as you read, just like I talked about in episode 5 and 6. Another main feature of Mark's Gospel is his use of triads, or patterns of three things. We see this especially in the last week of Jesus' life in several ways, like when Peter denies Jesus 3 times, or when Jesus finds his disciples sleeping in the garden 3 times, or how he mentions 3 three-hour intervals during the crucifixion. But perhaps the biggest one before Passion Week is the triad of discipleship and servant leadership, which is just a huge theme of Mark's Gospel. So check this out. 3 times Jesus predicts his death in Mark 8, Mark 9, and Mark 10. And 3 times the disciples respond with pride and misunderstanding, whether it's Peter rebuking Jesus or the disciples arguing about who the greatest is. And then Jesus also follows 3 times with a teaching about servanthood and cross-bearing discipleship, and how they're to follow him and mimic his lifestyle of servanthood and self-denial if they are to participate in the coming kingdom. Then it all comes to a head after all 3 predictions, with Jesus echoing the role of the servant of the Lord from Isaiah 52 and 53, saying that even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. So as a summary of the main points of this episode relating to this gospel, number 1, John Mark is probably the author. Number 2, it was the first gospel written and probably was in circulation as early as the mid-50s AD. Number 3, Mark is arranged chronologically, narrating Jesus' events mostly in Galilee and during Passion Week. And number 4, Mark focuses on Jesus' miracles and on his suffering as the Messiah and the servant of the Lord. So if you've been tracking with me this long, awesome. I've been taking a lot of time to introduce the Gospels because I really think it's so critical that we see these things even just a little bit. I hope it's been encouraging to you so far. I'm going to refer back to these episodes often in the series. Now, as I've mentioned before, if you have questions, be sure to submit them through the contact form or in the Gospel section of my website, www.joshuahawkins.com. I'm going to be taking some time out for some very special, dedicated Q&A episodes to answer your questions. In next week's episode, we're going to look at Luke. So bless you, and I'll see you next time.